for custom clothing is here. Creative Queen Collection offers quality graphic t-shirts, champion hoodies, and other accessories. Keep COVID out of your face with masks and haters off your back with backpacks. Creative Queen Collection is also the premier website for your favorite influencers' latest merch. Hair flip. Type www.creativequeencollection.com in your web browser to start receiving your favorite custom items today. Shop at Creative Queen Collection.
Hey y'all, so I just wanted to come on here tonight and say something. Today's October 1st. It's the beginning of Domestic Violence Awareness Month, so I just wanted to share with you guys my story and a little bit of an interview that I did with. But before we get into that, I just want to say that one of the things that you get asked as a survivor of domestic violence is, why do you stay? And I think there's a misconception about what domestic violence is. And so I just wanted to give you guys some facts in case you didn't know. It is extremely difficult to understand a victim's motivations for remaining with their abuser, but they are almost always based on the reality that their abuser will follow through with the threats that they have used to keep them trapped. I just want you to think about that as we go on. The abuser will hurt or kill them. They will hurt, kill the children, win custody of the children. They will harm or kill pets or others. They will ruin their victim's financial situation, and the list goes on. The victim of a violent relationship is the one who is most familiar with their abusers and fully understands the length to which they will go to ensure that they have and can maintain control over the victim. It is possible that the victim will not be able to safely flee or safeguard people close to them. It is possible to be isolated from friends and family members because of the abuser's jealousy and possessiveness, or because the victim feels ashamed of the abuse and tries to conceal traces of it from the outside world. The feeling of being alone contributes to the feeling that there is nowhere to turn. Victims often have the impression that the relationship is a mixture of wonderful times, love, and hope, as well as manipulation, intimidation, and terror. Fear of losing custody of any children if they leave or divorce their abuser, or fear that the abuser would damage or even murder their children if they leave or divorce the abuser, is also a very real concern. Whether you like to hear it or not, a lack of financial resources to sustain themselves and their children, as well as a lack of access to cash, bank accounts, or other valuable assets, will also play a factor in when a victim leaves, because being unable to find a place to stay, for example, friend's house, family, hotels or shelter programs are full, or you only get to stay at a shelter for 30 days, victims are often concerned that if they leave, they will be forced to live on the streets, which can lead the victim to the justification stage of their abuse. The justification stage is believing that their abuser's behavior is caused by stress, alcohol, troubles at work, unemployment, or other circumstances known as rationalization. The fact of the matter is, women are taught to believe that their identities and emotions of self-worth are dependent on their ability to attract and maintain a male by societal standards. So although there may be a pattern of inconsistency in abuse during nonviolent episodes, the abuser may be able to fulfill the victim's romantic love fantasy, sexual and non-sexual, like providing for the family. So when something horrible happens, the victims justify and say that the abuser has to let off steam. They're having a bad day. They're not usually like this. The victim may reason that the abuser is essentially decent until something bad happens to them. If it is possible, it is in the victim's best interest to do whatever they can to get away from their abusive partners. However, this is not the case in all instances. Abusers go to extremes on a regular basis in order to keep the victim from leaving. In fact, leaving an abusive partner is one of the most hazardous times a survivor of domestic violence may experience. But when you question or judge, be aware of the following. According to a study of intimate partner homicides, 20% of homicide victims were not domestic violence victims themselves, but rather family members, acquaintances, neighbors, people who intervened, law enforcement officers, or bystanders who witnessed the violence. According to another study, the men who have murdered their spouses, it was discovered that either threats of separation by their partner or actual separation were the most common occurrences that precipitated the murder. Keep in mind, in addition to the personal challenges that victims confront when attempting to leave abusive relationships, society as a whole poses obstacles. Divorce is not always supported by religious or cultural beliefs and customs, which can result in archaic gender norms being enforced and keeping the victim in prison in the relationship. In most religions, the purpose of the clergy and secular counselors are to save a couple's relationship at all costs, rather than to stop the violence in the first place. There's also the belief that the two-parent families are best for the children. There is a common misconception that domestic violence abusers are handled swiftly and harshly in the criminal justice system. This couldn't be further from the truth. Oftentimes, one of the things a victim will face is failure to provide adequate support to victims by police officers and other law enforcement officials who may treat violence as a domestic dispute rather than a crime in which one person physically attacks another. The majority of the time, though, victims of abuse are detained and charged by law enforcement, even if they are simply defending themselves against the batterer. This obviously causes the victim to be discouraged from pursuing charges by the police. Some people downplay or reject the abuse, while others side with the abuser or do not take the victim's description of the abuse seriously. Historically speaking, prosecutors have expressed reluctance to prosecute domestic violence cases. Some may be able to persuade the abuser to plead guilty to a lower charge, putting victims in even greater danger because now the abuser will come home from jail upset. In addition, judges rarely sentence convicted abusers to the maximum sentence allowed by law. The abusers typically get probations or fines as common punishments. And no matter what the intention of the criminal justice system, there is little that can be done to prevent an abuser who has been freed from returning and committing new acts of violence. Despite growing public awareness and improved availability of accommodations for victims leaving violent relationships, there are not enough safe havens to accommodate all of the people who need them. In the African American community, the stigma of being a baby mama or another single black mother equates to the feeling of failure to preserve the relationship, and that equates to failure as a person in every sense. This also leads some women to stay in relationships. So before you ask a victim why they stay, think about what it is you do to try to help a victim leave.